Molly Pitcher from the American Experience Storybook. Molly Pitcher was probably born Mary Molly Ludwig. However, historians can't be completely sure that Molly Ludwig and the legendary Revolutionary War heroine Molly Pitcher were the same person. Some people even think that Molly Pitcher is a character created from stories about several different women. Because of all this mystery, dates and particulars about Molly's life are often inconsistent. Regardless, Molly Pitcher was a one-of-a-kind woman. If she was Molly Ludwig, she was born in New Jersey in the mid-1700s and married William Hayes. When William went into the army, Molly went with him, traveling with the troops to help cook and take care of wounded soldiers. During battles, Molly would run back and forth bringing drinking water to the soldiers and dousing the overheated cannons with water as well. During the Battle of Monmouth, her husband collapsed at the cannon he manned. Molly dropped her pitcher and became Captain Molly for a bit, operating the cannon herself. Legend has it that at one point an enemy cannonball passed between Molly's legs, tearing her dress. She wryly glanced at the soldiers on either side of her and said, "Well, that could have been worse." Years later, the Pennsylvania legislature awarded Molly for her bravery, giving her an award and a yearly gift of $40 until she passed away. The following excerpt is from American Heroes and Heroines by Pauline Carrington Bouvier. Chapter: Molly Pitcher. Old Monmouth Courthouse in New Jersey, where the famous Battle of Monmouth was fought in the year 1778, preserves many stirring tales of Revolutionary days among its yellowed records. Tales of the pine robbers who spread terror and destruction along the Jersey coasts and who made the farmers in the neighborhood live very anxious lives. Tales of those old days when British Tory and American Patriot were at feud in house and home, as well as on the bloody battlefield. But among these stories of long ago, none stirs the blood with a warmer thrill of admiration than that of brave Molly Pitcher, whose heroism on the Monmouth field has found a lasting record in the pages of American history. Sometime toward the middle of the 18th century, there came to America from Germany an immigrant by the name of John George Ludwig, who settled in the colony of Pennsylvania. Here in the town of Carlisle, probably, though the exact locality of her birth is not positively known, was born to John George Ludwig, October 13th, 1744, a little blue-eyed daughter whom he called Mary. Little Mary grew up tall and strong and healthy, with the fair complexion and red hair of her German ancestors, and a good deal of her love of home and country. The Ludwigs being poor, Mary became a servant girl in the family of Dr. William Irvin, an Irish gentleman who was living in Carlisle. Dr. Irvin, who had come to the colonies, was a surgeon on board a British man-of-war, afterwards became an officer in the Continental or American Army. He was one of the most zealous of the patriots, and it was due to his influence that many of the colonists of Pennsylvania were aroused to a spirit of independence and a realization of the necessity of asserting and defending their rights. This was no easy task, for a great number of these colonists belonged to the Society of Friends, also known as Quakers, a religious sect that was opposed to war upon any conditions, and also because most of the proprietary owners were in favor of the crown. It is on account of General Irvine's nationality, perhaps, that the earlier historians of the Revolution supposed Mary Ludwig to be Irish, a mistake set right by recent investigation. It was while in General Irvine's household, no doubt, that Molly, as she was familiarly known, first learned to love the country of her birth, and there was sown the seed of that patriotism and loyalty that was one day to make the humble servant girl a soldier and a heroine. In July of the year 1769, Molly left the roof of her master and became the wife of a barber by the name of John Hayes. Whether or not Molly fired her barber with warlike ambition is an open question, But at any rate, Hayes was commissioned gunner in Proctor's 1st Pennsylvania Artillery on the 14th of December, 1775, changing the peaceful occupation of cutting hair with shears to the more exciting one of cutting off heads with cannonballs. With a loyalty born of devotion and unselfishness, Molly determined to follow her husband. So when Gunner Hayes marched off with Proctor's 1st, Molly marched with him. Through the din of battle, the heat of summer, and the cold of winter, the gunner and his faithful wife followed the fortunes of the American army, but it was not until the retreat of our forces at Fort Clinton that Molly's first deed of daring became a byword in tent and camp. Finding that it was necessary to leave the enemy in possession, Hayes started to fire his gun as a parting salute to the British. In the rush and confusion of the moment, he dropped his lighted match. There was no time to lose, and there was danger of being captured, so he did not stop. Molly, who was behind him, seized the match from the ground, ran to the gun, touched it off, and then scampered down the hill as fast as her legs would carry her to join the soldiers. This happened some months before the famous Battle of Monmouth. Down in Monmouth, meanwhile, the people were busy defending themselves from the attacks of the pine robbers, and never dreamed there would ever be any fighting in their midst. The murmur of the sea on one side and the murmur of the pine forests on the other made a melody of nature that shut out the distant roar of warfare. And so the tramp, tramp, tramp of the British army that suddenly aroused them must have been a very great surprise. The arrival of a French fleet with the gallant young hero Lafayette had startled Sir William Howe, who was at that time holding Philadelphia in siege. Sir William and his red-coated officers had been having a gay time in the old Quaker city. There had been balls and dinners and a great carnival during the winter, and when Dr. Franklin, who was with the American commissioners in France, heard of all this gaiety, he remarked shrewdly, "Howe has not taken Philadelphia, but Philadelphia has taken him." When the French fleet landed, and he knew that France had acknowledged America as an independent government, Howe began to think like Dr. Franklin, perhaps. Preparations were made to raise the siege of Philadelphia at once, and Sir Henry Clinton succeeded to the command of the British Army, with orders to go to New York by water. This plan of route was changed, however, and so it came about that the line of march was through the Jerseys, and so it happened that Old Monmouth became the scene of conflict. The line of British baggage wagons was 12 miles long, and the sandy roads made its progress slow. When Washington heard of Clinton's changed route, he determined to march forward and head him off. Arriving at a little place called Allentown, the English commander found the American force at his front. He pushed on, and on the 27th of June, encamped at Monmouth Courthouse, on rising ground that was hemmed in on all sides by woods and marshes. General Washington, after grave deliberation, decided to risk the fight, and although the battle was hotly contested and indeed almost lost 3 separate times, the American army was victorious. That memorable Sunday, the 28th of June, 1778, was the hottest day of the year. The heat was so great that the soldiers were ordered to take off their coats, yet through the heat and dust and smoke and blood, Molly, the gunner's wife, carried water to her husband and the soldiers on the field all day. The little spring from which she fetched the water was at the bottom of the hill, and instead of a pail, she brought it in a pitcher. This most probably was the origin of her name, Molly Pitcher, among the soldiers, a name that from that day has become historic. There had been a fierce charge of the enemy's cavalry on Hayes' gun, and just as she was returning with the refreshing draught for the almost perishing men, she saw her husband fall mortally wounded. Rushing forward, she heard an officer say, "Wheelback the gun. There's no one here to serve it." Checking the blinding rush of tears, Molly threw down her pitcher and seized the rammer of the gun. "I'll fire it," she said, and taking her place beside the dead gunner's cannon, she filled his place during the rest of the day. The story of the brave deed has been told in verse. "Wheelback the gun," the gunner said, when a flash before him stood, a figure dashed with smoke and blood, with streaming hair, with eyes aflame, with lips that falter the gunner's name. Wheelback his gun, that never yet his fighting duty did forget. His voice shall speak, though he be dead. I'll serve my husband's gun, she said. Oh, Molly, Molly, with eyes so blue, oh, Molly, Molly, here's to you. Sweet honor's roll will I be richer to hold the name of Molly Pitcher. The next day, General Greene sought for Molly and had her up to General Washington, who praised her for her courage and who presented her then and there with the commission of sergeant in the Continental Army. As the half-dazed Molly stood before the great general in her soldier's cap and coat, cheer after cheer for Sergeant Molly Pitcher went up from 10,000 throats. It must have been a stirring scene, stately Washington and the blood-stained, smoke-begrimed figure of the gunner's wife, who was now an officer and forever a heroine. A scene that must today thrill the heart of every boy and girl who reads the story of American history. Next day on that field so hardly won, stately and calm stands Washington, and looks where our gallant Greene doth lead, a figure clad in motley weed, a soldier's cap and a soldier's coat, masking a woman's petticoat. He greets our Molly in kindly wise, he bids her raise her fearful eyes. He hails her there before them all, comrade and soldier, where'er befall. And since she has played a man's full part, a man's reward for her loyal heart, and Sergeant Molly Pitcher's name be writ henceforth on the shield of fame. The battle on Monmouth was the only battle of the Revolution in which every one of the 13 colonies was represented, so Sergeant Molly's is a matter of national as well as local pride. For 8 years she did her humble part in the great struggle, and when the war was over, she went back to her old home in Carlisle, where she engaged employment as a nurse and where in later years she kept a little shop. One can easily imagine how Sergeant Molly's shop was a favorite place for the boys and girls of the town to gather on winter nights, when she would sit behind the counter and tell them about the dreadful winter at Valley Forge, where Washington's brave men suffered from cold and hunger. Or, on summer evenings, how the children would cluster about the veteran's knee and beg to hear again the story of Monmouth. To the soldiers, she was always Captain Molly, and the French officers and soldiers admired the woman soldier so much that whenever she passed their lines, her sergeant's cocked hat would always be filled with French coins. As she grew old, Molly grew garrulous, and she was very fond of rehearsing these old stories of her soldier life. She made an unfortunate second marriage, taking for a husband a worthless scamp of a fellow by the name of Macaulay or McNally, who lived on her sergeant's half pay and her hard earnings. By an especial act of the state legislature, she was given a pension of $80 a year. This act was passed on the 27th of February, 1822. She died in 1823. In 1877, the people of Cumberland erected a monument to Sergeant Molly's memory. The inscription reads, Molly Macaulay, renowned in history as Molly Pitcher, the heroine of Monmouth, died January 1823, aged 79 years. Erected by the citizens of Cumberland County, July 4th, 1876. There is more than a thrilling story in this woman's life. There is a lesson of endurance, loyalty, and courage, and more, the lesson of a life not spoiled by praise and popularity. Oh, Molly, Molly, with eyes so blue, oh, Molly, Molly, here's to you. Sweet honor's roll will I be richer to hold the name of Molly Pitcher. Well, thank you so much for listening in. Please click like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment down below. I love you guys, as Tigger says. Ta-ta for now.